the most dangerous secrets in Las Vegas aren't kept in the casino vaults. They're whispered over baccarat tables, buried in spreadsheets that no one is supposed to understand, and carried home every night by a woman that nobody bothers to look at twice. Margot Hess had a gift, not the kind people celebrated or put on LinkedIn profiles. Her gift was the kind that made her invaluable and invisible in equal measure. At 31, she was a forensic accountant embedded in the finance department of Vega Holdings, a legitimate-looking hospitality conglomerate that owned 4 of the Strip's most profitable properties. On paper, she reconciled vendor invoices, flagged irregular amortization schedules, and generated quarterly P&L summaries that went to a board that didn't fully exist. In reality, she could read a money trail the way a surgeon reads an X-ray. She knew which shell company in the Caymans fed which operational account in Nevada. She knew that the maintenance reserves column in the Obsidian Tower's ledger was moving between 7 and 11% higher than actual maintenance spend. A clean, consistent skimming pattern that had been running for roughly 14 months. She also knew, with the quiet certainty of a woman who spent her life being ignored, that the man doing the skimming was not working alone. Vega Holdings belonged to Ezra Vega. Ezra wasn't a name people said casually in this city. He was 42 years old, built like a man who had never once been afraid of what the dark might hold, and he ran the most quietly terrifying financial empire west of Chicago. Ezra Vega didn't traffic in flash. He wore charcoal suits with no tie, spoke in measured sentences that somehow carried the weight of a verdict, and had a stillness about him that made other powerful men nervous in ways they couldn't articulate. The legitimate world knew him as a hotel magnate. The less legitimate world knew better than to use his name without good reason. Margot had worked in the building for 2 years. She had passed Ezra Vega in the elevator exactly 3 times. All 3 times, he had looked through her with the flat, efficient gaze of a man cataloging furniture. She had not expected that to matter to her. It did not, she told herself firmly, matter to her. What mattered, what had been quietly eating a hole in her stomach for the past 6 weeks, was the realization that the man running the skim was Terence Okafor, Ezra's chief financial officer, his oldest professional ally, and, according to the company org chart, the second most trusted person in the entire organization. The first most trusted was a woman named Simone Beauchamp. Simone was everything Margot was not, and she knew it with the effortless certainty of someone who had never once had to fight for a room's attention. She was 34, willowy, polished, and occupied the role of Executive Vice President of Strategy, a title that meant she sat in every meeting that mattered and whispered in Ezra's ear at the ones she didn't attend. She wore emerald wrap dresses and spoke in a low, authoritative tone that made people lean forward. She and Terence had what the office called a close working relationship. What Margot called it was something else. Because Margot had a second gift, layered quietly beneath the first. After 10 years of sitting unnoticed in conference rooms while powerful people talked openly around her, she had become an involuntary expert in what people revealed when they thought no one was really watching. And Simone Beauchamp's micro-expressions, over the past 3 months, had been telling a very specific story. It was a Thursday in November when everything crystallized. The occasion was the annual stakeholder reception, a black-tie dinner held in the private ballroom of the Obsidian Tower, the crown jewel of Ezra Vega's portfolio. Margot was not a dinner guest. She was there because the finance team always sent someone to manage the vendor billing that came through that evening. Catering overages, the kind of line-item chaos, V discrepancies that always followed events of this scale. She wore her usual black blazer and her most comfortable flats. Her dark hair was pulled back. She carried a tablet and a laminated badge that said Finance, Staff, and she moved through the glittering room with the confidence of someone who understood exactly what kind of confidence was required to be thoroughly overlooked. The ballroom was spectacular. Obsidian columns reached toward a ceiling strung with suspended crystal drops. Men in bespoke tuxedos orbited women in silk that probably cost more than Margot's annual rent. The bar was doing extraordinary business in aged single malts and a bespoke champagne tin that a server told her cost $1,100 a bottle. Ezra Vega stood near the far end of the room, beside a floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the strip. He was speaking to an older man in a white jacket, a Honduran shipping magnate named Caldwell, according to Margot's mental roster of the guest list, and he was doing what Margot had observed him do in every room she had ever shared with him. He was utterly, completely present, as though the person in front of him was the only thing in the world that existed. It was a Nix. Was extraordinary quality in a man with enemies. Simone was at the bar. She had arrived 40 minutes ago, claimed a glass of champagne that she had not touched, and was now standing at the precise angle that allowed her a clear sightline to the main entrance while facing, ostensibly, the bar display. Margot was near the vendor table, entering numbers into her tablet, and she was watching. A man walked in at 8:17. He was mid-50s, silver at the temples, wearing a navy suit that was slightly too well-fitted for someone who wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't on the guest list, Margot knew, because she had cross-referenced the guest list against vendor registrations and comp allocations that afternoon. The way she cross-referenced everything, because that was what her brain did, whether she wanted it to or not. The man collected a drink from the bar without making eye contact with anyone. Then he stood, angled slightly away from the room, and Simone walked past him to retrieve a cocktail napkin she didn't need. The exchange was less than 4 seconds. Simone's hand rested briefly against the bar beside his. When she pulled it back, her palm was empty. His was not. Margot's heart rate elevated in a way that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. She stepped behind a floral arrangement the size of a small car and did something she had never done before in her professional life. She opened the notes application on her tablet and began writing down exactly what she had observed, time-stamped, in the flat, precise language of someone who had spent a decade writing audit memos. It took 40 seconds. Then she stood there, holding her tablet, understanding with perfect clarity what she had just seen. That wasn't a social exchange. That was a handoff. She looked at Ezra. He was still talking to Caldwell, his back to the room, completely unaware that the woman he trusted above almost everyone had just passed something to a man who had no legitimate reason to be in his building. Margot thought about what the skim meant. 14 months, roughly $4 million, based on her estimates. Terence Okafor had his name on the pattern, but patterns of that consistency didn't survive in an organization like Vega Holdings without someone running interference on the audit side, and the only person with the organizational authority to redirect or delay internal audit timelines was Simone. She thought about the fact that Ezra's quarterly security review was scheduled for next Thursday. She thought about the very specific set of financial discrepancies she had been quietly flagging in a private folder on her encrypted drive for the past 6 weeks, waiting until she was certain, until she had enough that no one could dismiss her as a confused junior accountant who had misread a column. She was certain now. The man in the navy suit was moving toward the east corridor, the corridor that led to the private offices on the 2nd floor, to the server room, to the backup financial archives. Margot looked at the distance between herself and Ezra. She looked at the sea of black tuxedos and glittering jewelry between them. She calculated the time it would take to cross the room and the near certainty that any floor staff approaching the principal during a client conversation would be intercepted by security before she got within 10 feet. She tore a sheet from the back of a vendor invoice on her clipboard. She didn't have a pen. She had a fine-point stylus for her tablet, and after 3 seconds of creative thinking, the sharp tip of a catering skewer that hadn't yet made it to the appetizer station. She pressed the stylus tip against the paper with enough force to leave an impression, realized that was insane, and found a working ballpoint behind the florals that some server had left near a portable bar tray. She wrote in the smallest, cleanest print she was capable of, "Simone just passed something to a man in a navy suit. Not on the guest list. He's heading to the east corridor. Server room access. This connects to a $4 million discrepancy I've been tracking in the Obsidian financials for 6 weeks. Terrence is on it. She's the shield. I have documentation." She folded the paper into a tight square. Then she picked up a glass of water from the tray beside her, straightened her blazer, and walked toward Ezra Vega. She was invisible. She moved through the crowd the way she always moved through crowds, with the steady, purposeful gait of someone whose job was to be unobtrusive. No one tracked her. No one shifted to let her through. She simply found the spaces between people, the way water finds cracks in stone. She had been doing it her whole life. She reached Ezra's peripheral vision and stopped 2 feet away, the water glass extended in the practiced stance of someone simply refreshing a guest's drink. Caldwell's glass was still full. Ezra's right hand held nothing. "Mr. Vega," she said. Her voice was quiet and absolutely level. "Still water or sparkling?" Ezra turned. His dark eyes found her face with the efficiency of a man who processed threats for a living, and registered. She could see it, the absence of one. A finance staffer. Round face, steady eyes, a tablet under one arm. Nothing that required any particular attention. "Still," he said, with a slight inclination of his head, that was more courtesy than he extended to most people who handed him things. As Margot poured, she set the glass down on the high top beside him and, with the precise control of someone who had been rehearsing the movement in her head for the past 90 seconds, pressed the folded note flat against the underside of the glass as she slid it into place. Her eyes went to his, just for a fraction of a second. She held his gaze. She did not smile. She did not perform the apologetic half-wince of someone who needed him to understand that she was sorry for the intrusion. She looked at him the way she looked at a balance sheet that was trying to hide something important. Then she lowered her eyes and walked back toward the vendor table at a pace that she forced herself to keep completely, absolutely normal. She did not look back. Behind her, she heard the conversation between Ezra and Caldwell resume for exactly 40 seconds. Then a silence. Then the particular quality of stillness that she had come to associate with Ezra Vega when he was deciding something. She was logging a catering variance when she saw, in the reflection of the polished obsidian column 6 feet to her left, Ezra palm the note without looking at it and say something brief to Caldwell that ended the conversation with a handshake. She watched the column's reflection. She saw the precise moment he unfolded the paper, shielded by the angle of his body. She saw nothing change in his face. Not a flicker, but his posture changed. It was subtle, the kind of thing you would only notice if you had been watching a person across many rooms for 2 years and had involuntarily memorized the particular set of his shoulders when he was relaxed. He wasn't relaxed anymore. Every line of his body had shifted into a different register entirely. He didn't look at her. He looked toward the east corridor. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and sent a text message that took less than 10 seconds. 4 minutes later, 2 men in security earpieces appeared at the corridor entrance. They moved without urgency, without any visual signal that anything had changed. To everyone in the ballroom, it looked like a standard rotation. Margot knew it was not a standard rotation. She watched Simone notice it too. The woman's champagne glass stilled halfway to her lips. Something moved behind her eyes. The very first crack in the flawless surface. And then she set the glass down and began moving toward the exit with the measured grace of someone simply heading for a breath of air. A third man in an earpiece appeared at the exit. Simone stopped. The party continued around her, shimmering and oblivious. Across the room, Ezra Vega turned to a nearby group and laughed at something. And if you didn't know what you were looking for, you would have thought he was having a perfectly pleasant Thursday evening. Margot thought, he is extraordinary at this. Then she thought, I need to find somewhere to stand for the next several hours, where no one will notice that my hands are shaking. She spent the next 3 days waiting for consequences she couldn't predict. The finance department was quiet, characteristically so, but a different quality of quiet than usual, the kind that comes from people choosing their words with unusual care. Terence Okafor did not come in on Friday. On Saturday, his assistant sent a group email explaining that he was dealing with a family matter. Simone Beauchamp's office was dark both days. Margot sat in her apartment in Henderson, eating leftover pho and refreshing her encrypted drive, and tried not to think about the fact that she had handed a written document to a man who ran one of the most sophisticated criminal-adjacent organizations in the western United States, and that document had her fingerprints all over it, metaphorically speaking. On Sunday evening, her intercom buzzed. She froze, faux spoon halfway to her mouth. She crossed to the intercom. Yes, Hess, a woman's voice, crisp, professional, entirely lacking in menace. My name is Diane. I work for Mr. Vega. He would like to speak with you. There's a car downstairs. Margot looked at her reflection in the dark window above the kitchen sink. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had just been found. Does he generally have his employees retrieved on a Sunday evening? She asked, a brief pause. He does when he considers it important. Margot set down her spoon. Give me 10 minutes. The car was a black Suburban with privacy glass. Diane sat in the front. The driver was silent. They took the 95 north and then turned east through a series of quieter roads that climbed into the desert foothills outside the city, eventually turning through a gate in a stone wall that Margot would not have noticed if she hadn't been looking for it. The house was low and expansive, built into the hillside in a way that made it look like it had grown there. Inside, it was spare and deliberate. Warm stone floors, high ceilings, art that looked chosen rather than collected. A fire was burning somewhere out of sight. The whole place smelled of wood smoke and something like sandalwood. Diane led her to a room at the back of the house, where 3 walls were glass, looking out over the dark valley and the distant glitter of the strip far below. The 4th wall was floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A desk occupied the center of the room like an anchor. Ezra Vega was standing at the glass, his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the city. He turned when she entered. He was in a dark Henley and slacks, the formal suit gone, and it made him look marginally more like a human being, and no less like someone whose stillness could fill a room. Mrs. Hess, he said. Mr. Vega, she said. Sit down, please. He gestured to a pair of chairs near the fireplace. The fire was here, then, smaller than she'd imagined from the smell, set into a stone hearth that occupied a space between 2 bookshelves. A low table between the chairs held a decanter of bourbon and 2 glasses. She sat. He sat across from her. He poured without asking, slid a glass toward her, and studied her with an expression that was difficult to categorize. It wasn't the calculating boardroom gaze she was accustomed to him wearing. It was something more direct than that, more personal. You've been building a case for 6 weeks, he said. It was not a question. Yes, without telling anyone. I had to be certain. I also had no way to verify whether the internal reporting channels had been compromised. She paused. They had been. Simone was overriding the audit flag escalation protocol. I found that last Tuesday. Something moved in Ezra's expression. It wasn't surprise exactly. It was the particular quality of a man absorbing a confirmation of something he had already begun to suspect, and finding it worse than expected. How much? He asked. Just under 4 million. But that's the Obsidian account. I haven't had authorization access to the other 3 properties. She looked at him steadily. My estimate is that the full number is somewhere between 11 and 14 million, depending on how long Terence was running similar structures in the other ledgers before I arrived. The silence that followed had a texture to it. "You have a psychology degree," he said, which was not what she had expected him to say next. "I do." "You never used it." "I use it every day," Margot said. "I just don't bill it separately." The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile exactly. More like the acknowledgement that a smile was a possibility he was considering. "Tell me how you caught Simone," he said. "Not the financial part. I have people for that. Tell me what you saw." Margot looked at the fire. She thought about how to explain to a man like Ezra Vega what it meant to be the kind of woman she was. How to convey, without it sounding like self-pity, or worse, self-congratulation, that invisibility was a skill set as real and as honed as anything you could earn a certification for. "She stopped looking at you the way she used to," Margot said 3 months ago. "Up until then, whenever you were in a room, her attention returned to you the way her compass returns to north, not because she was in love with you. I don't think it was that. It was the particular attention of someone who is managing you, monitoring, making sure the performance is holding. 3 months ago, that changed. She started looking at the exits instead." Ezra was very still. "She was anticipating the endgame," Margot continued. "People who are planning to run don't watch the center of the room anymore. They watch the edges." She paused, and she started touching her left wrist when your name came up in meetings, a specific, repetitive touch. Not jewelry, nothing there. Just a self-soothing gesture activated by a specific stressor. You were the stressor. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "My security team runs background checks, psychological profiles. The full battery. They missed all of it. Your security team is looking for weapons and wire transfers," Margot said. "They aren't looking at wrists." "No," he said quietly. "They are not. And they weren't looking at me," she added. "Which is how I was able to sit in 14 months of finance meetings and figure out that your CFO was robbing you blind before anyone else in the building had any idea." Ezra studied her. The gaze was different now from any version of it she had encountered in 2 years of sharing his building. He was not looking through her. He was not looking at her as furniture or as a function. He was looking at her the way she had just described Simone failing to look at him, as though she was the center of the room. "Why did you bring it to me directly?" he asked. "Thursday evening. The note. You could have gone to the board, to the Nevada Gaming Control Board, to the FBI. You had documentation." "The board has 3 members who share a quarterly dinner with Terence," Margot said. "The Gaming Control Board would have started a process that took 18 months and may or may not have reached the right people first. And the FBI." She picked up her bourbon glass and looked at it. "I think you and I both know that alerting federal investigators to irregularities in Vega Holdings' financial records would have created consequences that extended considerably beyond Terence Okafor." She looked up. "I wasn't interested in burning down the building to catch the man who stole from it," she said. "I wanted the right person to know." Another silence, longer this time. "The man in the navy suit," Ezra said. "His name is Garrison Blake. He's a fixer with ties to the Meridian Group out of Phoenix. Terence has been in contact with them for 8 months. What Simone passed him Thursday night was a keycard copy for the archive room." He paused. "We recovered it before he reached the corridor. Margaret absorbed this. He was going to pull the originals. Remove the physical documentation before the quarterly review." He leaned back. "If he had reached that room, every hard copy record that corroborated your digital findings would have disappeared." She thought about the timing, how close it had been, how 4 seconds different, and she would have been 16 at the real table, watching a crime succeed in real time. "You're done in the finance pool," Ezra said. Her stomach dropped. "I understand. I'm not firing you," he said, with an impatience that suggested he found the assumption uncharacteristic of her. "I'm offering you a different position." He stood, moved to his desk, and returned with a folder. He set it on the table between them. It was a single sheet inside. Not a check this time. A contract. Director of Internal Intelligence, he said. You don't audit ledgers. You audit people. You attend every meeting, every dinner, every negotiation. You sit quietly, wherever you are most useful. You tell me who is performing loyalty and who is actually loyal. You tell me who is planning something before they've finished planning it. He tapped the folder. The compensation is on the second page. Margot opened the folder. She looked. She looked at the number. She looked at it again. She thought about 2 years of black blazers and laminated badges that said staff. She thought about elevator rides in which she had been looked through like plate glass. She thought about every room she had ever sat in where powerful people made important decisions and assumed, without even bothering to assume, that the quiet woman with the tablet wasn't worth a second thought. She picked up the pen on the table. There's a condition, she said. Ezra raised an eyebrow. I choose where I sit, she said, in every room. I choose my position, my vantage point, and my cover identity for any given engagement. I don't get managed or redirected by your security team. He considered her for exactly 4 seconds. Agreed, she signed. What followed was the most disorienting 6 months of Margot Hess's life, and she had once spent 4 months auditing a pharmaceutical company that turned out to be a front for an art smuggling ring, so her baseline for disorienting was fairly high. She moved through Ezra Vega's world with the same quiet efficiency she had always brought to every room. But the rooms were different now. Private dinners in the side rooms of establishments that didn't appear on Google Maps. Negotiations in penthouse suites, where the principals spoke carefully around the thing they were actually negotiating, and Margot sat in the corner with a glass of water and watched. Charity galas. High-stakes poker evenings that were not really about poker. Meetings in the offices of city officials who did not know her name and would not remember her face and would absolutely remember what they had said when their careers eventually caught up with them. She was spectacularly good at it. In February, she identified a lieutenant in Ezra's logistics division who was feeding route information to a competing interest in Los Angeles. She had flagged it not from the financials but from the specific way the man's breathing pattern changed when certain shipment windows were mentioned, and from the fact that he had switched from his usual wristwatch to a new one in December, which meant new discretionary income he wasn't accounting for. Ezra had the information verified within 72 hours. The lieutenant was relocated, quietly, to a position in the organization that had no access to anything consequential. In March, she saved a business partnership worth approximately $40 million by noticing, during a dinner at which Ezra was negotiating with a developer from Dubai, that the developer's interpreter was softening his principal's language in ways that were slowly reshaping the terms of what had been agreed. In ways, she waited until a break in the proceedings found Ezra near the bar and murmured 3 sentences in his ear. He sent for a second interpreter. The developer, when confronted, was genuinely unaware that his representative had been steering the conversation. The deal closed on equitable terms. The original interpreter was escorted out and did not return. After that, Ezra's associates stopped being confused about why she was always in the room. They were still slightly afraid of her, which she had not entirely anticipated, but found she did not entirely mind. The shift between her and Ezra happened the way most real things happened. Not in a single moment, but in an accumulation of moments so small that you only recognize them in retrospect as a pattern. It was in the way he had started making sure there was always a chair positioned, precisely where she needed to be before she needed to be there. It was in the late evenings in his study when they debriefed the day's intelligence over bourbon and takeout. And the debriefs started running long because they kept finding other things to talk about. and eventually she had started keeping a change of clothes in the car because it was easier than driving back to Henderson at 2 in the morning. It was in the way he had stopped pretending in those conversations that he was only interested in her analysis. It was in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, though she was always watching. It was literally her job, with an expression that she had catalogued, carefully, and against her better judgment, as something she had no professional framework for. 1. Evening in April. They were in the study. The city below was a scattered field of light. She was reading through a summary of the previous week's activity. Ezra was behind his desk, signing something, and the room had the particular quality of comfortable silence that she had come to associate with these evenings. The kind of silence that wasn't waiting, he said, without looking up. The city attorney, she said. He wants something from the Whitmore development deal. He wasn't there for the introduction. He was there to make sure you noticed him. Ezra set down his pen. He's running for state senate next year. He wants your fundraising network, Margot said. He'll approach in the next 3 weeks. He'll frame it as a mutual opportunity. And is it? She considered. He's genuinely ambitious, which means he'll stay bought if the purchase is structured correctly. Whether that's useful depends on what you need from a state senator in 18 months. Ezra looked at her across the room. It was the direct look, the one she had been cataloguing since September. What would I do without you? He said, and she heard, beneath the professional register of the question, the thing he was actually saying. Navigate by guesswork, she said, keeping her voice steady. Like everyone else. He stood up and crossed the room. He stopped in front of her. He was close enough that she could see the fatigue around his eyes that he didn't let show in professional settings, and the specific quality of focus he was directing at her. And she thought, not for the first time, that there was something profoundly strange about being truly seen by a person whose primary talent was being impossible to read. I'm not interested in guesswork, he said quietly. I haven't been for a while, Ezra. She said his name the way she said everything that mattered, carefully, with full knowledge of what it meant. You can tell me to stop, he said. You're the only person in my world who actually can. She thought about that. She thought about every room she had ever been invisible in, and the man standing in front of her who had never, not once, from the moment she passed him a note under a glass of sparkling water, looked through her. She thought about what it meant to be seen not despite what she was, but because of it. Seen with the precise attention of someone who understood that the most important things in any room were the things other people didn't bother to notice. She said, I'm not going to tell you to stop. He kissed her with the same quality he brought to everything. Complete, unhurried, absolutely present. The night of the annual Continental reception, held this year in the newly renovated grand ballroom of the Obsidian Tower, which Ezra had gutted and rebuilt over the summer in a renovation that the architecture press called austere, and his associates correctly read as a statement. Margot stood in front of her mirror in a dress she had chosen for the first time in her life, purely because she wanted to wear it. It was the color of deep water, midnight blue cut to fall over her curves in a way that didn't minimize them or apologize for them, but simply moved with them, the way good fabric is supposed to do. Her jewelry was a single strand of something old and real. Her heels were exactly the height she was comfortable standing in all evening. She looked at herself and thought, yes, that's the one. The ballroom was exactly what the same room had been 11 months ago, full of men in black and women in silk, and the specific low-frequency hum of people performing alliances. Margot knew the guest list, the seating chart, the security rotation, and the 2 individuals who were there under false pretenses before she had finished her first glass of water. She handled both situations before the dinner service, when Ezra found her near the window at the room's east end, and he found her not the other way around, which was a thing that had changed. He stood beside her and looked out at the city and said nothing for a moment. "Clean room?" he asked. "2 minor items resolved. I'll brief you in the morning." He turned. He looked at her in the dark blue dress, in the low light of the ballroom, with the entirety of his attention. Around them, people moved and laughed, and performed the elaborate theater of mutual power. None of them were looking at the corner of the room. "Stay close tonight," Ezra said quietly. "Not for work." "I know," Margot said. He took her hand, unhurried in front of everyone, and turned toward the room. She felt the moment register across the gathered crowd, in a ripple she didn't need to be watching to detect. Heads turning, a recalibration of social maps. The quiet, rapid-fire reassessment of a woman they had been setting their drinks near and stepping around for 2 years. A man she recognized as a rival property developer took 2 steps toward them, his expression a careful composite of deference and calculation. "Vega," he nodded. His eyes moved to Margot with the specific quality of someone trying to perform a fast background check in real time. "And this is Margot Hess," Ezra said. "Director of Intelligence for Vega Holdings. She knows more about what happens in every room in this city than anyone else here tonight." He looked at the developer with the particular quality of gaze he reserved for people he wanted to understand something precisely. "Which means she knows considerably more about you than you would prefer." The developer laughed, slightly too quickly. Margot looked at him steadily and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to say. Later, she would think about the specific geometry of that moment. The developer's nervous laughter, the ripple of recalibration moving across the room, the weight of Ezra's hand holding hers. And what it meant to move through the world as someone who had spent her life making herself smaller and was now, for the first time, taking up exactly the space she was owed. She had not become someone different. She had not changed the things she was. She had simply stopped making them invisible. The woman who had spent 11 months folding herself into corners so that dangerous people would speak freely in front of her was still in this room. She was still watching. She was still cataloging micro-expressions and breath rates, and the specific tension in the shoulders of men who were planning things they hadn't finished planning yet. She was just done, pretending that was something to be modest about.